Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Sven. Sven, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce
Sure.
yourself?
Well, thanks for having me. Exactly. You said it. I'm Sven Przywarra. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of LiveEO. LiveEO is a satellite data analytics company, and I'm very much looking forward to the next couple of minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, satellite data analytics. I mean, a lot of times when I have people on the podcast and they give the kind of top line introduction of what they do, it's very broad. And satellite data analytics, not as broad, but still you could use satellite data analytics for lots of different things. But in your case, it's quite specific, right? What is it that your satellite data analytics
Yeah,
enable?
you're absolutely right. Satellite data analytics is rather broad. And honestly, when we started the company, because my co-founder Daniel and I, we share that belief that with satellite data, you can solve many, many different problems in many, many different industries and sectors. But what we decided is that we want to go deep in specific industries to really offer a solution which can help to solve specific problems. And we've done so over the last couple of years and have built a solution which helps grid infrastructure operators globally, pipeline and railway operators to maintain their infrastructure grids. And we've now, over the last couple of years, expanded into the supply chain space to help companies globally to comply with certain new supply chain regulation to make sure that they don't leave a negative impact on the earth.
Okay. Let me, before we get into that, give me a little bit about the genesis. What was the kind of damascene moment that you had that, you woke up and said, let's start this satellite data analytics
Yeah.
company?
So I was always fascinated with space, and it started with watching Star Wars in the cinema. And from there on, I was captivated with the idea of sending something into orbit. And I studied business engineering with a focus on space technology. Then I started to work in a hardware company, which was working in the space sector. But what I felt is that we already had launched, or humanity already had launched, so many satellites into space, which captured imagery of every single place in an ever higher growing frequency and with a always better resolution. And I was wondering, where are people using this data? And I wasn't seeing that. And so I met my co-founder at the conference, and he was seeing it exactly the same way. And we thought, if you have really information about every single place around the earth, where every asset anyone has ever built or is working on, what could you do with that data? And we went onto the drawing board and we thought around. But there was really the moment when we thought, oh my God, you have so much information. And with AI, you have the tools to unlock this information and the insights from this information. That's a great opportunity. Let's do it. And that was the reason why we started LiveEO, with the ambition to unlock the full potential of Earth observation for humanity and life on Earth.
Okay. And you said you started working with grid operators and things. Was that like vegetation management solutions, or what were you doing for
Exactly.
them?
So at the very beginning, we thought around, okay, what's the big, unique selling proposition, USP of satellite data? And it is that you can monitor vast areas in an instance. And this is not possible with any other technology. And we thought, okay, which company, and that was back in 2017 and 18, which companies have issues which are widely distributed, but for which one entity needs to pay? Because in the end, if you build a company, you need to build something for which someone pays. And we said, hey, well, these specifics really are fulfilled by grid infra operators such as railway operators, electrical grid operators, which need to maintain their networks. And one of the biggest problems, and you touched on it, is vegetation next to overhead lines, next to railways, which can fall into
Hmm.
these networks. And I mean, the wildfires in Hawaii, or also less catastrophic events such as just a tree on a railway network shows quite clearly what the negative implications of such an event can be. And obviously these grid operators want to avoid that. And so with climate change, you have more and more of extreme weather events. And so you need to have a paradigm change in the way you maintain your networks. And here satellite data comes in. What we can do and what our company offers is that we analyze your entire network. Doesn't matter whether it's 1,000 kilometers, 10,000 kilometers, or 100,000. We can monitor the entire network and tell you as the network operator precisely where you need to deploy forces and resources to maintain vegetation. And we're doing this on a constant basis. And this is exactly was the first product which we launched and which is now being in use on every continent of the earth by grid operators large and small.
Fantastic. And then you said now that you're moving into a new area. So tell us a little bit about that.
Because again, like the starting kind of hypothesis of LiveEO has been that satellite data is really applicable and can provide value to many, many different industries. And so our tech stack, which we've built in the background, which allows us to analyze satellite data at large scale, is useful for many different industries. And so we thought, okay, what could be the next industry where we can prove that? And so we looked around and we've identified that obviously monitoring vegetation, as easy as it sounds, it's not that easy if you really have to do it with very high precision at large scale. We thought, who could use this kind of capacity as well? And then we really took multiple months to really investigate different markets, and then I've identified an opportunity in the supply chain space, which is a new regulation, which is part of a bigger paradigm shift in the area of regulations, which is coming from the EU, and I'm going to speak about this in a second. But maybe the bigger picture, more and more regulatory bodies are requiring importers of goods, people procuring stuff, to make sure that the things they are procuring don't have any negative impact on the place of origin. And it's exactly kind of the storyline under this new EU Deforestation Regulation. The EU, the European Union, just has issued a new law 2 months ago, which requires any importers of 7 main commodities, including timber, cocoa, coffee, soy, palm oil, rubber, and cattle, that any company who imports any of these goods needs to validate that where these goods are coming from, no deforestation has been caused. No deforestation means that no trees have been cut back, no natural trees have been cut back, with the cutoff date 31st of December 2020. And obviously that puts a lot of question marks up. Like, how should I do that? If I'm an importer of cocoa, let's say of palm oil, how should I make sure that where the palm oil is coming from, let's say Southeast Asia, that this hasn't led to deforestation? And how do I go back in time and prove that? And what's the proof? And do I really need to do that? To the last piece of that question, the answer is yes. Companies need to do that. The European Union says if you don't do that, you have to pay up to 4% of your turnover as a fine. And how much time do I have to comply with this regulation? It's only really 18 months until the end of 2024. Big companies need to comply with this regulation and need to have validated their entire supply chain, and small companies until mid of 2025. And so to come the answer to the second part of the question, how can I prove that I haven't caused deforestation at the end of my supply chain or at the beginning? And the EU says you can use satellite data for that. And obviously we said, okay, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And here we are. We've analyzed vegetation. We know how trees look like. We can monitor what soil looks like, or timber or cattle, palm oil and so forth. And we can provide that proof. And that's where we said, okay, let's build a product for the supply chain sector. And we've built a compliance tool for companies to comply with this new EU supply chain regulation. Exactly.
So this regulation means that if I'm importing something, I am responsible to make sure that whatever it is I'm importing from those 7 categories that you mentioned, that I'm sourcing it responsibly. I have to be able to prove that my suppliers are not causing damage where I source it from. That's basically what the legislation says.
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. And it's kind of a very strict regulation in a sense that you can't just, like, let's say, validate 50% of your suppliers, or let's say 60% of your suppliers, and say, well, I've validated that more than the majority of my suppliers are complying with the regulation, so I can import, let's say, 100% of my goods. You need to really do a 100% check of your supply chain base. And obviously, as you said, that's not easy. Yeah.
Sure. And how do I trust the information that the suppliers are giving me? If they say they're getting this from this particular plot of land, how do I know they're not saying the same thing to 4 or 5 other or 10 other customers of theirs?
So obviously, this is a very good question, and not a question which has been answered in the regulation. I think the regulation is a start in the right direction to make sure that companies in the Western world are not causing deforestation, natural damage on the other side of the globe. But it's true that there are still some white spots and some loopholes in this regulation. This is one of them. How we on our side try to make sure that this loophole is fixed is by using analytics in the background to make sure that, for example, a certain plot of land is only producing a reasonable amount of commodities, so that a supplier is not only providing 1/4 of the entire plots of land, which hasn't led to deforestation, and say that all the commodities are coming from there, but that might be not even possible physically. So that's one way we do it. The other ways we're doing it is that we are implementing different types of analytics to prove that this type of commodities coming from that plot of land. We are providing some additional support for the people on site, for the farmers and so forth, to really be as precise as they can in putting in the plot of land where the commodity is being sourced from. And then right now we are also working on some additional features which will provide incentives to the farmers to put in exactly the right size of land into the system. But this is a feature which we're still working on.
Okay. And is it easy from your satellite data to identify the different vegetation that's on the land, palm oil trees versus, I don't know, oak trees versus whatever else might be there, natural trees?
So it's not as easy as one thinks, especially because in areas such as Southeast Asia, or in fact, like the regulation. So also if you're a Norwegian, let's say if there would be possible, you would be a Norwegian palm oil producer, you would also need to prove the validation. So it's really every company who's importing and placing any goods onto the European market needs to validate their imported goods. So the thing is that this obviously causes a problem, because you need to be able to provide high quality analytics, for example, differentiating different species on a global scale, which is very difficult because you have different atmospheric conditions all across the globe. You have different species conditions all across the globe. But the great thing about this is that we have struggled with that problem 5 years ago and have built a solution which overcomes this. So we're using state-of-the-art AI, the highest quality satellite data on the market, to exactly provide very clearly and very high accuracy results in terms of, like, that's a palm oil tree and that's a natural forest, to really allow the buyers of these commodities and also obviously the regulatory bodies to have a high level of trust in our validation methods.
And, I live in Spain now, but I'm originally from Ireland, and I got to think, there can't be great satellite imagery available of Ireland, given it's covered in clouds 95% of the time.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a facetious question. I assume you've come across ways to deal with cloud cover.
Absolutely. Obviously, cloud cover is the enemy of satellite imagery. But the great thing about it is that it would have been a big problem if we would dial back 10 years. But in the last decade, we have seen an explosion in the number of satellites in orbit. So we now not only take an image maybe 4 times a year, in which case, for example, for Ireland or also for countries in the tropic, would be very unlikely that there would be any image without clouds in it, or with no clouds over the area which you would like to look at. But now you have satellites in orbit which are taking pictures every single day of the year. And we're taking this imagery to exactly prove out there. And then even in Ireland and even in the tropics, you will find a patch of one time step where that's the case, and most likely multiple of these. And what we do is we stitch them together to generate a cloud-free mosaic on which we then run our analysis.
Okay, cool. And the listenership of this podcast are about 35 to 40% EU based. So for the other 60 to 65%, can they just forget about this and switch off the podcast now because it's not relevant to them?
I don't think so. So if you do any business so if you're doing any business with any European company or importing anything into the European Union, also if you're not a European company, you need to comply with that regulation. So similar with GDPR, this is really like forcing a regulation not only onto the European Union and its companies, but globally. That's number one. And then similar to GDPR, which sparked similar regulations all across the globe, we already see similar regulations being put in place in the UK and in the US. So it's most likely the case that this won't just be a regional thing for companies in Europe, but also that the regulation will apply to other companies. And so obviously the best thing for business continuity, if you want to make business with the European Union, and obviously also to be prepared if regulation comes into place in the UK or in the US, is already today to comply with that regulation. Because also the thing is that if you are a company who has a long supply chain or a complex supply chain, you want to make sure that your supply chain is compliant with that regulation prior to the cutoff date. Because again, the cutoff date is the last day of the next year. So it's not even 18 months any longer if you're a big company. Then you can't import the goods into the European Union, and obviously you want to avoid that. So it makes sense to think around about the regulation now and to think about how a satellite data and LiveEO might can help you.
Okay, and is this mandatory for all companies in the EU, or is there kind of a cutoff based on revenue or employee numbers, or is it if I have a one-man shop where I'm selling, I don't know, sweets in a corner, am I liable to this, or do I have to be over 500 employees, or where's the cutoff, if
So
any?
if you're a bigger company, obviously it's more strict, but it's applicable to more than 1.3 million companies. So you can really say large and small. It's all the companies which are importing or placing any good onto the European market. So if you're a company who just buys from your local shop, yeah, and resells this then on the street corner, well, then you don't have to worry about the regulation. But if you're, for example, a small coffee reseller and you're buying coffee in, let's say West Africa and importing it, you have to deal with that. And it doesn't matter whether you're 2 people, whether you're 200 people, you have to comply with this regulation.
Okay. And where is it going from here? I mean, is this the end of it, or will this legislation go broader, wider, deeper? Where do you see that going?
What we're seeing is a lot of regulation which goes in the direction of making sure that you as a company are fully aware of the emissions and negative implications on the environment you're producing, and that you need to be transparent about that to inform the capital markets about this. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that investors have much less interest to invest in climate harming companies than the ones which are not causing any harm on the environment. And so this EUDR is one piece of a much bigger movement globally of pieces of regulation which enforce not only to monitor your supply chain, but monitor the entire activities of your business in terms of emissions and obviously also other ESG factors. And so I don't think that it will end here. I rather think that this is part of the beginning. And the great thing about it is that it would also not have been possible, let's say, 10 years ago, right? Because, a lot of companies here also, or of your listenership, have already thought very deeply, very hard around, like, how do I keep track of my supply chain? And there have been great digital tools out there which have been doing that. So also to be very clear, what we're not doing is we are building a new supply chain software. What we are offering is a plugin, is a piece, is a complementary tool which allows you to comply with that piece of this new supply chain regulation. But again, like, I think that we're gonna see more regulation which goes down in that direction, and I'm sure that there's gonna be companies like LiveEO which will help buyers and sellers of products and goods to deal with this regulation.
Okay, so you see maybe more than the current 7 categories, you see that maybe broaden out to 8, 9, 10, 15,
And it's already in
whatever.
the making. These discussions are already happening. It started, by the way, with only timber. It was the EU timber regulation, which then became the EU Deforestation Regulation, which now started with the 7 commodities. But it's already in discussion to expand that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Interesting. And you alluded there to the fact that you're not trying to be a full supply chain solution, rather you are a plug-in for companies' existing supply chain. You'd think I'd be able to say supply chain at this point, 350 podcast episodes later. So you're a plugin for existing supply chain solutions. So is it kind of an API interface that you make available to people, or how do they access
So exactly. So we have a standalone application with a web interface and a mobile app for field crews. So if you're a company who decides to have that separately, you can do so. You can, with single sign-on, with your Gmail account, with your Outlook account, you can sign up and easily upload your supplier list, which then get an email, and which can even it's a few touch solution for anyone who wants to have a standalone solution. If you already use an SAP supply chain solution or a source map or any of the other tools, what we're doing is we're right now building out a lot of APIs into these different systems, which allow companies which already have a supply chain solution to make sure that they don't need to worry about, okay, I have a new tool. What we're offering as a plugin is to have that geospatial component in it, that people are able and suppliers are able to draw their polygons, and that we are able to analyze their plots of land to provide that proof of deforestation-free status back to them. And then obviously for the very, let's say, tech-savvy people, we have the standalone APIs if they want to implement it themselves into their tools. So we have all these free options available.
Cool. And where to next for LiveEO? I mean, you started with the likes of vegetation management for grid operators, and now you're doing the EU Deforestation Regulation compliance. What's next on your roadmap? Have you decided?
I think so. Again, coming back to what kind of the starting hypothesis of LiveEO has been, we are convinced that satellite data can help with many different problems in all kinds of industries. And so what we said is we want to start in one industry, which we've done in the infrastructure sector. Then we want to expand into a few adjacent ones, like the supply chain space, and we have some others cooking. But ultimately, we believe that the technology which powers our own systems will be able to be directly fed into new applications built by other companies and being used by other companies. So ultimately, we believe that we will go down the path of becoming a platform company and opening up our APIs. So if anyone's out there who already today wants to try out how they can leverage satellite data for their own applications, I would be more than happy to talk to them already about that. But that's kind of like the long-term vision of the company, because in the end, we want to unlock the full potential of observation data.
Okay, cool. Sven, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Is there any question I have not asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, maybe we've touched on it slightly, but I think maybe to summarize what people maybe should take away from this podcast, I think it's this new EU deforestation regulation, despite the fact it's being new, it is super relevant if you want to have business continuity. But how do you know whether your supply chain is already compliant or will be compliant in 18 months from now or 16 months from now? You better start thinking about this now. And we would love to help you doing that. And please feel free to reach out. And even if you say, well, we still have time, that might be true that there's still 16 months left. But if you have a complex supply chain, you want to maybe test out how much of my supply chain maybe is not compliant so that you can start finding new suppliers and to really ensure business continuity. And LiveEO would obviously love to help you with that.
Superb. Sven, that's been fascinating. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct?
So obviously you can always reach out to me via LinkedIn. And there I'm quite active. And then obviously if you want to find out more about LiveEO, live-eo.com. And if you want to find more about EUDR, just Google LiveEO and EUDR. EU Deforestation Regulation, you find all the information, including a white paper. But I think we also will be able to link that in the show notes.
Yeah. Send me any links that you think are relevant and I'll put them in the show notes for people. Superb. Sven, that's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.